Emberclaw Chronicles, Chapter 9, The Cliff Mirror. Morning came quietly to the hills. Mist still lingered in the lower valleys when Lyra, Emberclaw, and Seraphine left the broken tower behind them. The ruined structure stood alone against the pale sky, its empty mirror frame catching the faint gold of sunrise. Lyra paused once on the path and looked back. "It feels strange," she said. Something so carefully built, left silent. Seraphine turned her gaze toward the distant tower. The soft light of morning slid across her silver scales. "Structures rarely fail without cause," she said calmly, "especially when they were designed to endure." Emberclaw walked beside them, his golden scales warming under the rising sun. "That tower did not fail," he said. Lyra glanced at him. "No." Someone made certain it stopped speaking. The road curved away along the ridge. They walked for some time without hurry. The land had begun to change as they traveled farther from the village. Soft meadows had given way to rougher country where pine forests climbed the slopes, and the road wound through stone and shadow. The brass instrument hung from a leather strap across Lyra's shoulder. Inside its glass face, a small needle trembled faintly. Seraphine noticed. "It grows stronger," she said. Lyra tapped the casing lightly. "So there is another tower." "Not necessarily," Seraphine replied. There were many smaller relays in the network, mirrors positioned between the greater towers to guide the signal along its path. Emberclaw tilted his head, so the light traveled like a conversation. Seraphine nodded. "Yes." Lyra smiled slightly. "I like that." They continued upward along the ridge until the trees thinned and the path opened onto a long stretch of exposed stone. Wind moved steadily across the height. Lyra stepped toward the edge and looked down. The valley beyond spread wide beneath them, green and shadowed in the early morning light. "That's beautiful," she said softly. Emberclaw joined her at the ridge. "Beautiful," he agreed, "and inconvenient." Lyra followed his gaze. Halfway up the cliff face across the narrow valley stood a stone pedestal no taller than a man. At its top rested a circular metal frame. Inside the frame was a mirror. It still caught the sunlight. Lyra straightened. That must be one of the relays. Seraphine studied it quietly. "Yes, but it looks intact," Lyra said. "Does it?" Emberclaw replied. Seraphine watched the mirror for a moment longer. "It is misaligned," she said. Lyra looked again. The mirror angled slightly upward, reflecting sunlight toward the empty sky rather than across the valley. "Someone adjusted it," Seraphine continued. The brass instrument twitched sharply in Lyra's hand. "That explains this," she said. Emberclaw studied the cliff. The pedestal stood on a narrow ledge, halfway up the rock wall. Too narrow for a dragon to land. Lyra watched the wind sliding up the cliff face. Dust lifted briefly along the rock before settling again. Emberclaw considered the height. "I could carry you up there," he said. Lyra shook her head. Not safely. Seraphine glanced at her. Lyra gestured toward the stone wall. The wind is rising along the cliff. If you hover beside it, the air will push your wings into the rock. Emberclaw watched the currents for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. Lyra slipped the brass instrument from her shoulder and handed it to Seraphine. Besides, she said calmly, removing her cloak, someone built those handholds. Seraphine looked closer at the rock face. Shallow cuts had been carved into the stone long ago. They did. Lyra smiled faintly. Then someone expected a climber. She walked to the base of the cliff. Emberclaw watched her begin the ascent. You say that as if you have done this before. Lyra's voice drifted down from the stone. Once or twice, Seraphine followed her progress with quiet interest. You never mentioned that. Lyra paused briefly on the cliff and glanced down. I never had reason to. Then she continued climbing. The wind tugged lightly at her braid as she moved upward, testing each hold before shifting her weight. Below, Emberclaw and Seraphine waited. After several careful minutes, Lyra pulled herself onto the narrow ledge beside the pedestal. She crouched for a moment, steadying her balance. I'm here, she called. Up close, the mirror mechanism was clearly intact. Only the angle had been changed. Lyra placed her hands on the metal rim. Which direction should it face? Seraphine stepped forward and studied the surrounding hills. Her eyes traced the distant ridges. Toward the western hills, she said. Lyra squinted across the valley. There are several western hills. Emberclaw's wings spread slightly. I will simplify the matter. Before they could reply, he leapt from the ridge. Golden wings caught the sunlight as he glided across the valley and landed on a rocky outcrop on the far side. He turned and faced the mirror. Adjust it toward me, he called. Lyra carefully rotated the mirror. The mechanism creaked, but moved smoothly. More to the left, Seraphine instructed. Lyra shifted it slightly. Stop. For a moment, nothing happened. Lyra frowned. Is that right? Seraphine checked the brass instrument. Not yet. Lyra nudged the mirror again. Suddenly, a thin beam of sunlight flashed across the valley. It struck Emberclaw's golden scales and reflected brightly. The light leapt again from his shining hide and shot farther toward the western hills. Far in the distance, something glimmered faintly in reply. Seraphine smiled. The alignment is correct. Lyra laughed with relief. Well, that worked. She secured the mirror and carefully climbed back down the cliff. When her feet touched the ground again, Emberclaw returned in a smooth golden arc and landed beside them. Lyra brushed dust from her hands. Emberclaw regarded her with mild approval. You climb cliffs more confidently than most dragons I know. Lyra grinned. I'll take that as praise. Seraphine studied the glowing brass instrument. The network still responds. Lyra looked toward the distant hills where the reflected light had vanished. So the path is still there. Emberclaw followed her gaze. Yes, he smiled slightly. The light remembers the road. Lyra nodded. Then we should keep following it. The three companions turned toward the western hills. Far beyond the ridges, another tower waited. Dragon